Learning styles. Whether one conceives of intelligence as having one major component or several, psychologists agree that it is an ability. Typically, it is better to have more of an ability than less of it. In recent years, psychologists have also studied a characteristic for which the issue of capacity is less important than what form the characteristic takes. What we are referring to here is the concept of a learning style. Cognitive style is an alternative form that you will also see in this literature. Unlike abilities, styles are considered to be value neutral. That is, all styles are adaptive under the right circumstances. A learning style can be defined as a consistent preference over time and subject matter for perceiving, thinking about, and organizing information in a particular way. Some students, for example, prefer to think about the nature of a task, collect relevant information, and formulate a detailed plan before taking any action, whereas other students prefer to run with the first idea they have and see where it leads. Some students work on several aspects of a task simultaneously, whereas others prefer to work on one aspect at a time in a logical sequence. Notice that styles are referred to as preferences. They are not fixed modes of behavior that we are locked into. When the situation warrants, we can, at least temporarily, adopt different styles, although some people are better than others at switching styles. Over the years, quite a few learning styles have been proposed. You will find, for example, articles about visual learners, verbal learners, assimilators, accommodators, global learners, analytic learners, abstract learners, and concrete learners. Of these many styles, we will examine three. Two, reflectivity, impulsivity, and field dependence, field independence, were formulated more than 40 years ago and have a long history of research. The third, mental self-government, is more recent and contains some original elements, but also includes styles that have been the subject of some research. Reflectivity and impulsivity. One of the first learning style dimensions to be investigated was reflectivity, impulsivity. During the early 1960s, Jerome Kagan found that some students seem to be characteristically impulsive, whereas others are characteristically reflective. Impulsive students are said to have a fast conceptual tempo. When faced with a task for which there is no ready solution, or a question for which the answer is uncertain, the impulsive student responds more quickly than students who are more reflective. In problem-solving situations, the impulsive student collects less information, does so less systematically, and gives less thought to various solutions than do more reflective students. Reflective students, in contrast, prefer to spend more time collecting information, which means searching one's memory as well as external sources, and analyzing its relevance to the solution before offering a response. Like IQ scores, these styles tend to be fairly stable, but they can change in response to environmental demands. Decreases in television watching among a group of 6-year-olds resulted in decreased impulsivity, increased reflection, and more time spent reading. Field dependence and field independence. Another very popular learning style dimension, known as field dependence, field independence, was proposed by Herbert Witkin, Moore, Goodenough, and Cox, and refers to the extent to which a person's perception and thinking about a particular piece of information are influenced by the surrounding context. For example, when some individuals are shown a set of simple geometric figures and asked to locate each one by outlining it with a pencil within a larger and more complex display of intersecting lines, those with a field-dependent style take significantly longer to respond and identify fewer of the figures than individuals with a field-independent style. The former are labeled field-dependent because their perception is strongly influenced by the prevailing field. The latter are called field-independent because they are more successful in isolating target information, despite the fact that it is embedded within a larger and more complex context. When we talk about individuals who have a field-dependent style and compare them with individuals who have a field-independent style, we do not mean to imply that there are two distinctly different types of individuals. That is like saying that people are either tall or short. Just as people's heights range over a measured span, students can vary in the extent to which they are field-dependent or field-independent. In fact, relatively few individuals exhibit a pure field-dependent or field-independent style. In school, the notes that field-dependent students take are more likely to reflect the structure and sequence of ideas as presented by the teacher or textbook author, whereas the notes of field-independent students are more likely to reflect their own ideas about structure and sequence. When reading, field-independent students are more likely than field-dependent students to analyze the structure of the story. The significance of this difference in approach is clearly seen with materials and tasks that are poorly structured. Field-independent students usually perform better in these situations because of their willingness to create a more meaningful structure. The positive effect of field independence and on achievement is particularly noticeable in the sciences because of their emphasis on analyzing objects and ideas into their component parts, reorganizing ideas into new configurations, and identifying potential new uses of that information. Biology students, for example, need to be able to identify tissues, organs, and systems that are difficult to see at first glance because they are embedded in the surrounding tissue of an organism. In social situations, field-dependent people, in comparison with field-independent people, spend more time looking directly at the faces of others, are more aware of prevailing attitudes, values, and behaviors, prefer to be in the company of other people, and are generally thought of as more tactful, considerate, socially outgoing, and affectionate than field-independent individuals. Not surprisingly, in one study, kindergarten children gave field-dependent teachers higher ratings than field-independent teachers. They also preferred teachers whose styles matched their own. Mental self-government styles. Robert Sternberg, whose ideas on intelligence we discussed earlier in this chapter, has proposed an interesting learning style theory that is roughly modeled on the different functions and forms of civil government. Sternberg's styles of mental self-government theory has attracted considerable research. Although research to test the theory continues, it is viewed as a useful approach to understanding learning styles in a variety of settings. In Sternberg's theory, 13 mental self-government styles fall into one of 5 categories: functions, forms, levels, scope, and learning. Within these categories, there are legislative, executive, and judicial functions, monarchic, hierarchic, oligarchic, and anarchic forms, global and local levels, internal and external scopes, and liberal and conservative leanings. Most individuals have a preference for one style within each category. In Table 4.3, we briefly describe the main characteristics of each style and suggest an instructional activity consistent with it. If you are wondering how to identify these styles, Sternberg offers a simple solution. Teachers can simply note the type of instruction that various students prefer and the test types on which they perform best. Evidence that these styles can apply to various cultures comes from Hong Kong, where instructional methods tend to emphasize rote learning and to be more regimented than is the case in many U.S. schools. High school students in Hong Kong who expressed a preference for the legislative, liberal, and judicial styles tended to have lower grades than did students who preferred the conservative and executive styles. Matching instructional activities to Sternberg's mental self-government styles. Style, legislative. Prefers to formulate rules and plans, imagine possibilities, and create ideas and products. Requires students to design science projects, write stories, imagine how historical figures might have done things differently, organize work groups. The executive style prefers to follow rules and guidelines. present well-organized lectures, require students to prepare book reports, work out answers to problems. Judicial style prefers to compare things and make evaluations about quality, worth, and effectiveness. Requires students to compare literary characters, critique an article, or evaluate the effectiveness of a program. Monarchic style prefers to work on one task at a time or to use a particular approach to tasks. Assign one project, reading assignment, or homework assignment at a time. Allow ample time to complete all aspects of the assignment before assigning another. Hierarchic style prefers to have several tasks to work on, deciding which one to do first, second, and so on, and for how long. Assign several tasks that vary in length, difficulty, and point value, and are due at various times over several weeks. Oligarchic prefers to have several tasks to work on, all of which are treated equally. Assign several tasks that are equivalent in length, difficulty, and point value. Anarchic prefers an unstructured, random approach to learning that is devoid of rules, procedures, or guidelines. Assign tasks and problems that require non-conventional thinking and methods, self-directed form of study. Global style prefers to have an overall view of a task before beginning work. Requires students to scan a reading assignment to identify major topics, create an outline before writing, or formulate a plan before beginning a complex task. Local style. It's style, right? Local style prefers to identify and work on the details of a particular part of a task before moving to another part. Local style. Present a detailed outline or overview of a lecture or project. Require students to identify and interrelate particular details of each part of a reading assignment. Internal style prefers to work alone. Require seat work, projects, and assignments that do not depend on others for completion. External prefers to work with others. Assign group projects or reports, encourage study groups, or create discussion groups. Liberal prefers to work out own solution to problems. Assign problems for which students must work out solution procedures. For example, identify and report on proposed legislation that concerns the environment. Conservative prefers to do things according to established procedures. Assign homework or projects that specify the steps, procedures, or rules for accomplishing the task. Improving practice through inquiry, one teacher's story. Individualizing classroom instruction to fit different learning styles, by Shamara Underwood. It is common to notice the different learning styles and dispositions of the children in your classroom within the first week. So it wasn't difficult for me to perceive that one of my students, who was extremely gifted in memory and recall, was having problems thinking critically in the context of several learning tasks. I will call him Kyrie. Kyrie was 4 years old, and he experienced one of the more extreme cases of separation anxiety that I have seen as a teacher. When trying to reason and negotiate with him about when he would see Mommy again, he was only concerned about the facts. Number 1, Mommy is leaving now, and 2, I don't like it. After several days of extreme crying and attempts to escape, Kyrie realized that the facts were that Mommy was going to leave him at school, and she would return whether he cried or not. We kept him engaged in activities, and eventually he began to enjoy school, and was one of the first children in the classroom every day. But that is getting a bit ahead of the story. Kyrie arrived at school capable of identifying and recalling every color of the rainbow in order, spelling his name, identifying all the letters of the alphabet, recognizing every number, and counting to 100. In fact, before the year ended, he was reading sight words and blending consonant-vowel-consonant words. When engaged in academic tasks, he was quite capable. I first realized a teaching and learning challenge during our direct instruction activities when Kyrie's responses to prompts requiring him to think critically to make connections were fragmented and unrelated to the task at hand. He also had difficulty playing with others. Often he could not think of what to do during conflicts with his peers. He was also an avid tattler. When asked what he could say to his peers to resolve a conflict or how he felt about coming to school that day, he seemed at a loss. Kyrie's typical responses were entirely disconnected from such questions. Even after being redirected to think about the actual question several times, he was able to generate a response only when the question was rephrased and he was allowed to choose an answer. This helped to keep him engaged, but it limited his responses and did not help him to think critically or make connections between his own experiences and our class discussions. Because Kyrie's academic skills were at a high level, assessments did not qualify him for the individualized help he needed. I decided, therefore, to individualize our normal classroom instruction for him. During group conversations, I began using Kyrie's name in imaginative scenarios while reading stories or having discussions that seemed to be engaging to the children. One successful instance occurred while reading what became a classroom favorite, Smelly Bear by Britta Teckentrup. During the reading, I stopped and said expressively, "This bear is so smelly. I don't know what he could do. I bet Kyrie knows what this bear could do." With all the children bursting at the seams to answer the question, I asked the children to allow Kyrie to answer. With the excitement from the story charging him, he yelled, "He needs a bath! He needs a bath!" This was one of the first moments I realized that the individualized attention Kyrie had been receiving was helping him to make connections to his own thinking, ideas, and solutions. It signaled a change in his thinking. Rather than just memorizing information, he started to connect with what he already knew to new situations. He was not yet the best critical thinker in the class, but I have learned that each child comes into the classroom at a different level and with different abilities, personalities, and learning styles. Kyrie's thinking had shown growth, and that was a success. Shamira Underwood teaches at the Pittsburgh Public Schools Early Childhood Program. Research on learning styles. There are two basic questions about learning styles that should interest any educator. The first is, do learning styles exist? For many styles, the answer to that question is yes. Instruments that accurately and reliably measure a particular set of styles do exist. That leads to the second question, can forms of instruction be devised that work best only with students who demonstrate a particular style? In other words, if we created visual and verbal forms of instruction for the same material, we would expect visual learners to perform best with a visually based form of instruction, and verbal learners to perform best with a verbally based form of instruction. But we would also expect each group to perform more poorly when exposed to a form of instruction that did not match their style. The research findings for this question are not, at least at this point, terribly positive. With one or two exceptions, researchers have not found that matching instruction with learning style produces higher achievement than when a mismatch exists. Why not? The literature suggests at least two possibilities: quality of instruction and memory capability. In some cases, the instruction is of such high quality that it simply overpowers the influence of learning style. In other cases, students with a high working memory capacity excel regardless of style differences. So should you ignore the concept of learning style and teach everybody the same way? Not just yet. Just because researchers have not yet found styles and forms of instruction that interact in the way we described does not mean they never will. There are many variables and combinations of variables that remain to be tested. It is also possible, if not likely, that as you learn about the characteristics and preferences of your students, you will be able to figure out how to tailor your instruction to the styles of at least a few of them. In the next section, we offer some general suggestions for incorporating the concept of learning styles into your teaching. Using awareness of learning styles to guide instruction. Because the typical classroom contains 25 or more students who may exhibit several styles, teachers must be flexible and learn to use a variety of teaching and assessment methods so that at some point every student's style is addressed. An impulsive boy, for example, may disrupt a class discussion by blurting out the first thing that pops into his head, thereby upstaging the reflective types, who are still in the process of formulating more searching answers. To minimize this possibility, you may want to have an informal rotation scheme for recitation, or sometimes require that everyone sit and think about a question for 2 or 3 minutes before answering. To give the impulsive style its place in the sun, you might schedule speed drills or question and answer sessions covering previously learned basic material. To motivate students with a legislative style, for example, have them describe what might have happened if a famous historical figure had acted differently than he or she did. For example, how might World War II have ended if President Harry Truman had decided not to drop the atomic bomb on Japan? To motivate students with a judicial style, have them compare and contrast the literary characters Tom Sawyer and Holden Caulfield. As implied in these examples, a consideration of the diversity of intellectual styles has implications not only for designing instructional activities, but also, as we will see in Chapter 14, for designing assessments. Using a variety of instructional techniques and assessments makes sense for several reasons. First, the ways in which students learn can change over time and situations. Second, using various teaching techniques and testing formats may stimulate students to expand their own repertoire of learning styles. Finally, recent research suggests that although students display learning style preferences, they can learn through a variety of instructional tasks. Table 4.3 can serve as a guide for varying your instructional tasks and consequently expanding your students' repertoires. Pause and reflect. Analyze yourself in terms of the learning styles discussed in this chapter. Recall classroom situations that made you comfortable because they fit your styles, and classroom situations in which you were uncomfortable because of a mismatch of style. Now imagine the students who fill your classroom. Should you even try to design your lessons and assessments so that they match the style of most students at least some of the time? If so, how will you do that? Using technology to accommodate learning styles. Just as technology can be used to strengthen different forms of intelligence, it can also be used to accommodate learning styles. Consider a recent study in which elementary students who used a web-based virtual science laboratory, one that integrated both information and communication in their science lessons, earned higher grades than students who engaged the lessons through traditional classroom instructions. Although the students who used the web-based virtual lab exhibited different learning styles, there were no differences across learning styles. This finding allowed the authors to conclude that the web-based virtual lab accommodated the diversity of learning styles. Aside from specific programs such as a web-based virtual science lab, the range of technological tools that have become available in the Web 2 world can be used at all grade levels to address the varied learning styles that students bring to the classroom. Indeed, Mindwan Wang and Moyungi Kong have coined the term cyberpedagogy to refer to ways in which information and communication technologies can be used to engage learners that vary in terms of not only their learning styles, but their cultural backgrounds as well. Amy Benjamin is a veteran teacher who has written a number of books that focus on differentiating instruction in middle and high school classrooms. She argues that technology not only is an effective tool for accommodating student differences, but also offers a unique opportunity for collaboration among novice and veteran teachers. Speaking to veteran teachers, she writes, our young colleagues, like our students, are used to e-communications and e-learning. We know about classroom management. They know about technology. As never before, novices and veteran teachers have much to offer each other. As you encounter veteran teachers and learn how they accommodate student differences, consider that technology enables learners to engage information in different ways, and consider how you might collaborate with your veteran colleagues in the service of student learning.